500-year-old bones on sticks. Hundreds of years ago, the indigenous inhabitants of the coastal territories of modern Peru collected the remains of their dead from defiled graves and put them on sticks. Scientists have counted almost 200 of these sticks in stone tombs in the territory of Chincha Culture Valley. Archaeologists suggest that the Spaniards who plundered these graves are to blame for the appearance of such a practice. In an attempt to somehow restore integrity to the remains of their ancestors, the indigenous people strung them on such sticks. In total, archaeologists have studied 664 graves in 42 cemeteries spread over an area of 40 square kilometers of the Chincha Valley. They found 193 sticks with vertebrae. It was possible to determine their age by radioactive carbon in the bones and wood. Radioactive carbon accumulates in the body during life, and after life, it decomposes into nitrogen at a known rate. By the amount of radioactive carbon left, you can find out when the organism died. The analysis showed that the vertebrae and sticks died in 1450–1650 AD, during the collapse of the Inca Empire and the seizure of power by European colonialists. Most of these restored burials were found by scientists in large stone tombs called chalpa. In such tombs, several people were almost always buried. In one, scientists counted the remains of hundreds of people. At its peak, in 1400, the Chincha Kingdom had a population of about 30,000 people. At the end of the 15th century, they merged with the Inca Empire. After the arrival of Europeans, famine, and epidemics, the population was greatly reduced. In 1583, only 979 houses remained. It is known from European documents that the Spaniards often devastated Chincha tombs, collecting gold and artifacts and destroying the remains. Statue of a dragon with a tiger head. Chinese archaeologists, during excavations in the legendary ruins of Zhangqiu in Sichuan province in southwestern China, discovered a unique bronze statue of the divine beast, a dragon with a tiger head and dragon horns. The four limbs of the bronze statues on a triangular copper bracket, and the back part goes up. The archaeologists found the statue in December 2021, but they decided to talk about the find on the eve of the Chinese New Year, which according to Eastern calendar is the year of the tiger. It is reported that the body of the bronze deity has not yet been fully excavated. Due to lack of time and heavy work tasks, the experts decided to conduct a second full excavation of this artifact in March 2022. It is already known that the artifact dates back to the Shang dynasty, which existed in China from the 16th to the 11th centuries BC. According to scientists, the bronze statue of a half-dragon, half-tiger most likely was either a religious object used in rituals or was a symbol or totem of some famous and influential clan. However, more details will be available only after the excavations are completed and the sculpture is studied in the laboratory. Mysterious woman 300 years older than Ötzi. Austrian scientists re-examined the remains of an individual discovered in 1909 near Graz and found that they belonged to an elderly woman who died at the age of more than 50 years around 3630–3380 BC. These are the oldest human remains found in Styria, which are about 300 years older than Ötzi found nearby. Examination of her bones showed that during her life, she often starved, and after her death, it seemed that her head was cut off. In the era of the late Neolithic and Eneolithic, that is around 4900–3400 BC in Central Europe on the territory of modern Hungary, Slovakia, the Czech Republic, Austria, Slovenia, and Poland, the Lengyel archaeological culture was formed, which is named after the burial ground of the same name, excavated at the end of the 19th century. This time stands out primarily due to the development of copper processing, which among the barriers of the Lengyel culture is mainly represented by finds of jewelry. These people, who were mainly engaged in agriculture, preferred to settle in large fortified settlements, with which their burial grounds are also associated. Burials were performed mainly according to the rite of inhumation, in a crouched position on the side, and men were often buried without skulls. Scientists noted that it was a fairly strong woman of small stature who died at an advanced age, about 53 years old. An examination of the bones showed that the woman had well-developed muscles, apparently as a result of carrying heavy loads over long distances. The remains also show evidence of multiple periods of malnutrition, resulting in a high susceptibility to disease. Apparently, her short stature, about 147.1 centimeters, was also the result of nutritional deficiencies. Researchers found signs of manipulation in her skull, so the woman's occipital foramen was expanded with the help of incisions, and the condyles were also removed. In addition, traces of interference are visible on her fist and second cervical vertebrae. Scientists believe that shortly after her death, her skull was separated from the cervical vertebrae with a flint knife. The reasons for this behavior, according to the researchers, are difficult to judge. Perhaps this is part of the funeral rite, the desire to extract the brain or receive a trophy. Fragments of gold embroidery in the Arctic. Human scientists during excavations in the Arctic found fragments of gold embroidery of the 17th century, which is the first such find in Russia. Early examples of such gold embroidery and man's artwork were known only from engravings. Things were preserved due to the climate of the Arctic. After studying the find, the scientists came to the conclusion that the gold threads consist of a silk core folded from 200-300 silk threads and twisted with strips of foil. The threads are made in Western Europe, but the clothes themselves were made by Russian craftswomen. The finds have survived to this day due to the conditions of the Arctic zone, permafrost, and special soil processes. The cell caps probably got closed with gold embroidery as payment for the royal service. There are no such finds in any museum in Russia. The remains of gold embroidery are planned to be exhibited in the Museum of Salekhard. Remains of royal clothes in Israel. Researchers from Israel conducting excavations in the Timna Valley discovered the remains of a woven fabric, a brush, and wool fibers dyed in the so-called royal purple. The shade of the fabric matched the biblical descriptions of the purple robes worn by King Solomon and other ancient rulers. According to scientists, they got the opportunity to look into the wardrobe of biblical kings. Purple dye had a bright color and durability, but it was extremely difficult to obtain. Therefore, it was distinguished by a very high cost and was available only to the elite. Radiocarbon dating has confirmed that the finds date back to around 1000 BC, which corresponds to the time of the biblical kingdoms of David and Solomon in Jerusalem. At that time, purple was made from shellfish living in the Mediterranean Sea. According to historians, it costs even more than gold. Scientists noted that this is the first time that Iron Age purple cloth has been discovered in Israel and in general in the entire southern Levant. Previously, only clamshell scraps and potsherds with stains of paint which testified to the purple industry could be found. The fabric has been preserved in the valley due to its extremely dry climate. The mystery of the lewistonbronze figurines. In the late 1920s, the antiquities market was flooded with exquisite bronze figurines. These were images of people and animals, embossed bronze goblets, and elegant pins. They delighted connoisseurs of antiquity, but little was known about the origin of these figurines. Merchants indicated only the region in the mountains, Lewiston. At the same time, no information about civilization, time, or exact place of their origin was reported. The figurines began to spread in 1928, when in the town of Harsin, about 30 kilometers east of Hermannsha, a local farmer discovered them in his fields. The rumor about them quickly spread, both among scientists and local residents, who quickly set about excavating. At the same time, flows of merchants went to the city, who bought works of art and resold them to museums and collectors. The first Western archaeologist to investigate bronze figurines was the German-born scientist Erich Schmidt, who thus began to explore Lewiston in 1935. On the advice of his wife, Mary Helen, he decided to use the plane to survey the area. Thus, Luristan and other Iranian cities, including Persepolis, were previously studied from above. Aerial photography proved to be valuable not only for the study of places, but also for archaeology in general. Subsequently, it became widely used by archaeologists around the world and is used to this day. True, in addition to aerial photography, scientists have also recently used laser mapping. Despite numerous unauthorized excavations that began in the late 1920s, Eric Schmidt's team managed to find a large number of bronze, ivory, and ceramic items. All items were similar to those found earlier. Much of the research work at Sarkdam was centered around the multi-chamber structure, which was believed to be a temple or place of worship. In addition, archaeologists have also found many items in the tombs. The civilization that created these products is still a mystery. Candidates include the early Medes, an Indo-European group that lived in the area. Other scholars are inclined to believe that the figurines were created by the Sumerians, a nomadic people who originated in southern Russia and may have moved to Luristan in the 8th century BC. Cuneiform inscriptions on swords found in the region suggest that the items were made by the Kassites, a people who settled in Luristan around the 16th century BC. Until the beginning of the 12th century BC, they occupied central and southern Mesopotamia. As for the figurines themselves, many of them depicted men and women. Many animal figurines have also been found, ranging from big cats or birds of prey to mythological beasts such as griffins and sphinxes. This motif is characteristic of many ancient civilizations. It is believed that it symbolizes the dominance of man over nature. Millennium Time Capsule. I want to show you an ancient underwater place that you have hardly heard of. This place is called Cheyenne Cave, which is probably the largest underwater quarry on the planet. Inside the cave, there are traces of machines and other facts indicating that it was created by an unknown civilization. And since it is flooded inside with water, it managed to avoid natural weathering. Thus, this cave is a time capsule with clean water. The cave is located in China, not far from the South Sea. In fact, this mountain is not a mountain at all, but an extinct volcano over 80 million years old. The entrance to the cave is quite modest, but once you go inside, you will see a hole that can accommodate 1,000 people. At the other end of the hole, artificial caves flooded with water begin. By the way, the mountain is located at an altitude of 100 meters above sea level, and all this is inside an extinct volcano. Only in 2009, a group of divers decided to find out. Their research showed that the cave has an area of at least 60,000 square meters. Underwater, they found countless steps leading to the lower holes. Following the steps, the divers discovered stacked stone slabs that were apparently the remains of an ancient working. Their appearance resembles the appearance of pavement slabs in ancient China. The divers were able to map the cave. The divers also found various bowls, lampstands, and bamboo ladders. The walls of the caves are covered with silt. However, under it, divers were able to find traces of tools. Similar marks can be seen in the Yangshan quarry and the Baalbek. By the way, scientists still do not know how these marks are made. It is possible to make them with hand tools. Since the cave was rediscovered not so long ago, you can be sure that these traces appeared there millennia ago. Researchers suggest that the ancient Chinese discovered these caves 1,000 years ago and used them as a quarry. At the same time, they did not work at the maximum depth. This is evidenced by the finds found like lamps and tools, and it would be extremely difficult to transport finished thin slabs. Roughly built cobblestone stairs also speak of this. At the same time, traces of complex ununified tools can be found everywhere on the walls. This suggests that completely different types of labor force worked in these mines. This suggests that this structure is a megalithic structure created by an unknown civilization that dominated the Earth thousands of years ago. Rama's bow and rockets. Rama is the protagonist of the ancient epic Ramayana, who is always depicted with a bow and arrow. The legends say that he never missed, and his arrows could pass through several targets at the same time. For example, in this image, his arrow is going through 7 trees. Usually, ancient sculptors depicted people with primitive bows, but the bow of Rama and his troops always had unusual details. This is how archers are depicted on the walls of the Chenakasava temple. Archers march alongside regular foot soldiers in regular clothes, and their bows have wheels. The amazing thing is that modern bows use the same rollers that, according to Wikipedia, were invented about 50 years ago. But the walls of the temple make it clear that the ancients used this technology thousands of years ago. Of course, some expert will come and say that this is just decoration, flowers, but why do soldiers need to decorate their weapons? Did Rama only need rollers on his bow to punch through 7 trees? Now let's look at their arrows. Everyone knows that the arrow should be thin and long, but the arrows that we see in these images are more like rockets. The arrowhead looks like there's something inside it and doesn't look like a simple pointed tip at all. Remember the Rambo movie? There is a guy on YouTube who proved that attaching explosives to an arrow is a piece of cake. The fact that these are rocket arrows and not just arrows is also said by the legends about Rama. They say that the area where the arrow hit was destroyed and his enemies exploded, leaving only soot behind. It is impossible to know for sure whether Rama and his soldiers had such advanced technology. However, we can judge the ancient people by carvings, and we can say with confidence that they were incredible builders, even surpassing modern ones. And based on this fact, we can conclude that the weapons of ancient people could be much more complicated than historians tell us. Ancient mask of a strange substance. More recently, the sensational news spread around the world that mysterious artifacts were discovered off the coast of Florida. Their antiquity was obvious, but their origin was unknown. In total, 7 items fell into the hands of scientists. All of them are created from a material that is practically not found on Earth, iridium. Of course, this item was created by the hands of people and in quite earthly conditions. The fact is that iridium is found in large quantities in fallen meteorites. Apparently, the ancient people noticed the sign from heaven and went after it. Having obtained the most precious stone, they began to create cult objects. Analysis of the artifacts showed that they are at least 12,000 years old. Considering that iridium is a very refractory and hard material, it is probably worth reconsidering the level of development of metallurgy among the ancient Incas. Presumably, these items belong to them. Personally, I have no doubt that the ancient civilization possessed transcendental knowledge in those areas that have not yet been conquered by modern humanity. Therefore, there is no doubt that the masters were able to create these masterpieces 12,000 years ago. Of greatest interest was the mask of the god Viracocha. Its thickness is only 1.7 millimeters. At the same time, there is a drawing of a great deity and various religious symbols on it. This artifact allows us to conclude that the culture of the late Incas is extremely scarce when compared with objects that are thousands of years old. The image of the god Viracocha allows you to accurately determine the origin of the product. It was created by the Incas 12,000 years ago. However, modern history indicates that the Inca Empire is one of the youngest civilizations. It turns out that historians deliberately hide the truth about the ancient Incas or know very little about them, their true culture. Does it remind you of anything? The Anglo-Saxons destroyed the great history of the Indians, so that there was a feeling that America was built not on the death of Indian civilizations, but on the territories occupied by uneducated nomadic tribes. Slavic knowledge was subjected to a similar purge. History cannot be trusted. Thank God, artifacts help to find out the forgotten truth. Rare 4,000-year-old board game. During excavations of the settlement, archaeologists discovered a 4,000-year-old Bronze Age board game. The board game was discovered by a team from the Polish Center for Mediterranean Archaeology at Warsaw University and the Ministry of Heritage and Tourism of the Sultanate of Oman. Teams have been studying the area since 2015, and the region, the Kumaira Valley, proved to be rich in archaeological finds. Evidence of settlement from as early as 4,300 to 4,000 BC has been found, as well as later remains from 1,100 to 600 BC. Recently, archaeologists have made several finds, including evidence of large unexplained towers up to 20 meters in diameter and evidence of copper work. But the most unexpected discovery was a game board made of stone, with markings and holes for cups, although it is not explained how the game could work. It is known that ancient board games entertained people many thousands of years ago. According to the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York, one board game called Senet was very popular in ancient Egypt and was played by queens such as Nefertari as well as less wealthy members of the population. It consisted of a grid of 30 squares, and the players tried to get their pieces through the last square. Moves were determined by throwing a stick or a bone, and players could block their opponent's forward movement or knock their pieces back. Kazakh Tutankhamun. Sensational finds were made by Soviet Kazakh archaeologists in the late 60s of the last century. Kurgan Isek gave the world thousands of gold items, as well as a new symbol for the Kazakh people, the Golden Man. The burial mound is located on the left bank of the mountain river Esek, near the city of the same name, which was later renamed Esek. In the year 69, excavations began, and in the 70s, the central burial chamber was opened, which turned out to be looted. The young archaeologist Bekan Narkemambetov did not despair and decided to continue excavations, and just 10 meters from the central burial, an untouched burial chamber made of processed Tian Shan spruce logs was discovered. The more experienced scientist Kemal Akeshev undertook the excavations of the new burial. It was then that a sensation evaded archaeologists. From under the thickness of the earth, scientists extracted ancient finds one after another, and all of them were made of gold. As a result, more than 4,000 gold items were counted. In one of the burial chambers, the remains of a young man in golden robes were found, lined with his head to the west, for which he was nicknamed the Golden Man. According to scientists, the deceased was a Seika king. Later, the researchers found that the buried was about 18 years old. He died presumably as a result of a sword or knife wound in the back. Some scientists claimed that the remains belonged to a girl. This was indicated by a bronze mirror and an earring. However, most scholars consider the Golden Man to be male. It will no longer be possible to establish this with the help of modern analysis. The remains are lost. Badger discovers horde of Roman coins. The badger led archaeologists to a hoard of over 200 Roman coins that had been hidden for centuries in a cave in Spain. The animal dug into a crack in the rock inside the La Cuesta cave in the Asturias region of northwestern Spain and dug up the coins, which were later discovered by local resident Roberto Garcia. Garcia called in archaeologists, including excavation director Alfonso Fenjol, who believes the badger was looking for food or digging its own nest. When archaeologists arrived at the site, they found a hole leading to a badger's nest and the ground around it full of coins. The badger dug up over 90 coins. The team then conducted an archaeological dig, which unearthed a total of 209 coins dating from 200 to 400 AD. This corresponds to the late Roman period, when such barbarians as the Suebi arrived in the Iberian Peninsula. It is believed that the coins were hidden by refugees who had taken refuge in the area. The coins are currently being cleaned and will be on display at the Archaeological Museum of Asturias. Tunnels where giant sloth lived. I suggest you look at the real evidence of megafauna which was once home to South America. Tunnels cut through the entire south of Brazil. Some of them are more than 50 meters long and a person can easily walk through them. These amazing places were discovered less than 20 years ago, and they have not even been properly studied yet. You've probably heard of underground cities, but what about the huge tunnels dug by giant sloths thousands of years ago? They are found throughout southern Brazil, and these tunnels are quite unique. Local scientists call them paleotunnels, which literally translates as ancient hole. These holes are really ancient because they appeared at least 12–15,000 years ago and maybe even earlier. It was then that the megafauna of South America died out. These tunnels were first discovered in the early 2000s, quite by accident. Geologist Heinrich Frank, who is a professor at the University of Rio Grande do Sul, drove past the construction site. At a construction site, a technician dug a strange hole in a hill, and Frank decided to return to it a few days later with the equipment. Before his eyes appeared a small tunnel about 5 meters long, and it was very strange. The geologist carefully examined it from the inside, and on the ceiling he noticed traces of huge claws. Frank understood that no element, no natural phenomena is capable of creating a cave with similar characteristics. So it was logical, albeit rather wild, to assume that some large animal dug this tunnel. Just imagine how a resident of South America can play out a fantasy, because this continent is inhabited by simply countless species of animals. But of course, no modern creature known to science is capable of digging such a hole, so Frank came to the conclusion that this was the work of the paws of some ancient beast. Soon, similar tunnels began to be found in other regions of Brazil, and hundreds of such shelters are now known. Some of them are 60 meters long and about almost 2 meters high. It is assumed that they were created by ancient giant sloth, Megatheria. They were real giants and weighed about 4 tons. At the same time, sloth moved on their hind legs, and standing were about 6 meters, which means twice as high as modern elephant. In addition to sloth, such burrows could also be built by glyptodons, another giant of the past, the ancestors of modern armadillos. Only now they were several times smaller, about 2 tons. Scientists believe that sloth built the largest tunnels, while glyptodons dug smaller burrows. We know that dinosaurs lived many years ago. Their bones and fossilized eggs have come down to us, but we do not know exactly what their dwelling was like. Scientists can only speculate and put forward theories, but with giant sloth and armadillos, everything is different. Their homes have reached the 21st century. Medieval horses were smaller than ponies. A knight in shining armor riding a tall horse is a deeply rooted part of popular culture's portrayal of the Middle Ages. But it looks like the horses of that era were actually pony-sized, much smaller than their modern-day descendants, according to the largest study of horse bones in history. A study published in the International Journal of Archaeology examined the size and shape of 1,964 English horse bones dated between 30 and 1,650 AD, found at 171 separate archaeological sites. The researchers compared these bones to those of modern horses to understand how the animals have changed over time. On average, horses from the Saxon and Norman periods were under 1.5 meters, ponies by modern size standards. In the Middle Ages, horses had different combat missions, and they have been bred with these missions in mind. Horses, which may also have been intended for display on tournament use as well as for running, were taller, while smaller horses, known as steeds and trotters, had to travel long distances during mounted military campaigns. Horses have been used in warfare for thousands of years and are still in use today. US Special Operation Forces used horses in Afghanistan as early as 2001. Sea dragon in the UK. Ichthyosaurus of the species Tymnodontosaurus trigonodon lived in the ocean for 180 million years. The fossil of a 10-meter ichthyosaur was found in the UK. The marine reptile has become the largest dinosaur skeleton ever found in the country. Paleontologist Dean Lomax wrote about this on his Instagram page. The scientists also published images of the ancient giant skeleton. Sea dragon was found near the reservoir in the English county of Rutland, reports the BBC. The outlines of an ichthyosaur were noticed during the planned draining of the island. It took 3 weeks to unearth the fossil. The size of the skeleton is 10 meters. Ichthyosaurus appeared on Earth about 250 million years ago, died out about 90 million years ago. The lengths of marine reptiles could reach 25 meters. The remains found in Rutland waters were attributed to a separate species of Tymnodontosaurus trigonodon. The Fake Factory. Egypt's first archaeological replica factory aims to promote culture around the world. Dozens of designers, sculptors, painters, and workers dressed in white coats were busy making replicas of ancient Egyptian artifacts at Khuna's Egypt Replica Treasures, the first factory in Egypt and the Middle East to make replicas of historical Egyptian antiquities. In fact, the company produces not only copies of Egyptian antiquities, but also copies of Coptic, Islamic, and Greco-Roman antiquities. Production depends on the artistic and historical value of the original work, as well as its popularity locally and internationally. Built on an area of 10,000 square meters in the industrial area of Al Bor city in Kalubia province, north of the capital Cairo. The factory consists of several spacious sections for designing, printing, sculpting, painting, and so on. Ahmed Hussein, head of the sculpture department, worked on a copy of the golden mask of the famous ancient Egyptian king Tutankhamun. Replicas are produced here in a ratio of 1:1 as an identical model. Most of the artists at the factory come from the High Council of Antiquities of the Ministry of Tourism and Antiquities. Shark victim from ancient Japan. Shark attacks on people do not occur very often if you do not take into account films, and there is even less historical evidence of such incidents. The earliest documented case dates back to about 1000 AD, but it seems that scientists have found the unfortunate much older. An international team of researchers studied the remains of a man buried at a Tsukuma burial ground in Japan and found that he was the victim of a shark attack more than 3000 years ago. The Tsukuma burial ground belongs to the Jomon era. This is the generalized name of the archaeological cultures of the ceramic Neolithic of the Japanese islands, the time of hunter-gatherers, including fishing. The remains at number 24 in question were radiocarbon dated to 1370–1010 BC, that is, to the late Jomon period. The man was buried in a bent position. His fellow tribesman laid his left leg on his body with his foot to his head. In addition, the skeleton was missing the right leg and left hand. On the bones, the researchers found at least 790 perimortal traumatic injuries characteristic of a shark attack. It was not possible to determine the specific type of shark, but most likely it was a tiger or white shark. Ramses the Great and the Gold of the Pharaohs. Ramses the Great and the Gold of the Pharaohs is a brand new multi-sensory museum that will allow guests to experience the life and accomplishments of Ramses III, better known as Ramses the Great. Visitors will come face to face with over 181 priceless artifacts, including Egyptian treasures and one-of-a-kind relics, many of which represent the most prominent pharaoh. On this breathtaking journey, visitors will discover a stunningly preserved collection of artifacts, including sarcophaguses, animal mummies, magnificent jewelry, spectacular royal masks, exquisite amulets, and the tomb's ornate golden treasures showcasing the superb craftsmanship of Egyptian artists. Walking among real colossal statues, visitors explore many of the world's most valuable treasures and learn the most important stories about Ramses and life in Egypt, including Ramses' military victories, including the multimedia recreation of Ramses' triumph at the Battle of Kadesh, arguably the biggest chariots battle ever happened. I believe that this museum should be visited by everyone who is interested in archaeology and especially ancient Egypt. Pot Cave. 67 kilometers from the city of Casas Grandes in the north of the Mexican state of Chihuahua is one of the oldest archaeological sites in Mexico, Cueva de la Ola, Pot Cave. This rock formation is part of a complex located in the valley of the caves of Vela de las Cavas. This is a huge natural complex located on top of the Casas Grandes mountains. Cava de la Ola, a place characteristic of the Pachem culture, consists of 7 adobe rooms built in a rock shelter. In the center of the cave, you can see an interesting artifact. A huge Quetzalcoatl about 3 meters high, hence the name of the monument, Cueva de la Ola, literally Cave of the Pot. Quetzalcoatl is a traditional vessel for storing corn, pumpkin, amaranth, and other cultivated crops, which is made of clay and straw. Similar vaults have been found elsewhere in the region. Both the rooms and the granary show typical ancient architecture of the area. Cueva de la Ola dates back to 950–1060 AD, and the very emergence of the Pachem culture is estimated at about 700 AD. Neanderthals were more human than we think. Dr. Rebecca Rex Sykes is an archaeologist specializing in Neanderthals, relatives of modern humans who died out about 40,000 years ago. She chose to highlight an article published last April in Scientific Reports about the discovery of 100,000-year-old Neanderthal footprints off the coast of the Spanish Iberian Peninsula. While these are not the first Neanderthal footprints discovered, they are very special. This is a group of all ages, including children, some of which are very young. It seems that they foraged for food at the edge of the lagoon. Diversity in age plays a key role here, and actually helps to challenge the common assumption that Neanderthals foraged alone, with adults separating from the group to find food for children. The discovery instead supports the theory that hunting and gathering may have been a family affair involving the combined efforts of different generations. Some of the footprints, which belonged to the children, were grouped in a chaotic manner, as if they were playing. The discovery helps lend a sense of humanity to this not-so-distant relative of man. Oldest shark attack victim. Sharks do not attack people as often as shown in the films, but sometimes it does happen. And most importantly, albeit occasionally, but sharks always attack people. This is confirmed by the bones of 3,000 years ago. The skeleton was found at the Takama Shell excavation site near the inland sea of Japan in the early 20th century. But then the researchers failed to explain the bone injuries. And these bones, Takama 24, were rediscovered by archaeologists from the University of Oxford, Great Britain, who study cruelty in prehistoric Japan. In total, scientists have counted on the bones at least 790 deep marks with jagged edges. Most of them were on the arms, legs, and chest. The skeleton was missing a left hand and right leg. At the same time, the left leg was placed in the grave over the body, but in the opposite direction, with a foot to the body. At the same time, there are no traces of healing on the traces. The number of injuries was staggering, but the man was buried in the cemetery. At that time, the locals were still using stone tools. The footprints on the bones did not resemble the marks of stone tools or the teeth marks of local predators and scavengers. Unfortunately, the tracks are superimposed on each other, so it is impossible to determine the exact shape of the jaw, and then the specific type of shark. Scientists have studied the skeleton itself. This was a young man who lived between 1310–1010 BC. Judging by the fact that the shark's teeth left marks on the bones, the arteries were also severed. The man died very quickly. Mysterious family grave. A group of Siberian archaeologists have discovered an unusual family burial in Caucasia, which is about 2,500 years old. Presumably, a husband and wife with a newborn child and an elderly maid were buried in the grave. As determined by experts, the burial belongs to the Tagar culture and can shed light on the Scythian civilization. At the time of death, the husband and wife were about 30 years old and their maid 60. The remains of the baby were scattered throughout the grave, most likely due to the activities of rodents. Archaeologists also suggest that both spouses were warriors. The same weapon was found in their hands. This surprised the specialists. In the burials of the same time in these places, female warriors were buried with bows and arrows, long-range weapons. However, in this grave, the woman carried an axe and a short sword, which are suitable for close combat. The man was found to have 2 axes and 2 bronze daggers. Experts attribute the burial to the Tagar culture, an archaeological culture of the Bronze Age and Iron Age, 8th–3rd centuries BC. According to archaeologists, the find may shed light on the life of the ancient Scythian civilization that existed 2,200 years ago and is suitable for presentation in a museum. In addition to skeletons, rare objects of the Tagar culture were found in the grave: knives, mirrors, a horny comb. 110 graves in the Nile Delta. The Egyptian Ministry of Antiquities told about a new find made at the archaeological site of Kamal Kulgan in Dakalia province, about 150 kilometers northeast of Cairo. Archaeologists have unearthed 110 tombs. Some have preserved human remains. 68 tombs of this number belong to the pre-dynastic period of the civilization of Lower Egypt, which spans 6,000–3,150 BC. These are oval-shaped pits carved into the sandstone. The people buried in them were located mainly on the left side with bent knees. Their head was facing west. The burial of a child in a ceramic vessel was also found here. The 37 rectangular tombs date from the ancient era known as the Second Intermediate Period, 1782–1570 BC, when the Hyksos ruled ancient Egypt. The depth of the burial pits is 20-85 centimeters, and the bodies in them were laid in an extended position, face up, but also in a westerly direction. Children who died during this period were buried in coffins or clay vessels. And 5 more oval tombs are evidence of the culture of Nigeta III, 3200–3000 BC. Pottery, amulets, jewelry, and other interesting artifacts were found in these and other graves. Little-known Inca fortress in Peru. In Peru, next to the southern plateau of the Sacred Valley, near the Four Lakes region, is the Pucara Inca fortress. The complex is located in the province of Acomar, Cusco. In the Quechua language, Pucara means Wekra is the horn and Pucara is equivalent of strings, fortress, that is, fortress of the horn. Looking at this place, the name of the fortress is more than eloquent. But the shepherds of the communities of Aco, south of the city of Cusco, also know him as Lama Pucara. These are not horns, they assure, but the ears of a llama, which is vary of the presence of strangers. Despite the almost inaccessible location of the fortress at the top of the peak above the abysses that overlook the Apurimac River Canyon and are at an altitude of more than 4,000 meters above sea level, at least 4 ancient roads lead to this place. The best preserved stone walls with fine carvings, stairs, terraces, and rooms in the best classical Inca style. Unfortunately, the remoteness of this magnificent architectural complex makes it less famous than other monuments such as Sacsayhuaman, Ollantaytambo, and others. The fortress itself is located at an altitude of 4,300 meters above sea level. It rises about 8 walled terraces and stone stairs. The architectural complex offers a magnificent view of the Apurimac River Valley. Pucara is located in the distance, and to get to it, you need to spend 5–6 hours on the road, half of them on foot. The architecture of Pucara combines masonry and natural formations, and in this way resembles Machu Picchu. The fortress itself consists of 2 groups of architectural structures. The Pucara fortress has a certain stealthiness, and in addition to its defensive function, it may have been a refuge and an astronomical observatory. There is also a version that this architectural complex was associated with rituals for the development of agricultural activities and astronomical observations. This version is supported by the fact that the structures of this place are oriented towards the sunrise. Ship of Cheops. The Great Pyramid of Cheops has always attracted the attention of not only the entire scientific world, but also ordinary people. After all, to see with your own eyes one of the greatest mysteries of the planet is something. It hides many secrets and mysteries that have no end and edge. Every scientist dreams of making a new discovery about it. Sometimes this takes not days and months, but years. Here is a proof of this. A group of archaeologists consisting of Egyptian-Japanese archaeologists announced the completion of excavations at the walls of the Pyramid of Cheops, which lasted for 15 years. They found the remains of a burial ship, and for so many years they have been removing them from the ground. The work was very painstaking, but it was worth it. In total, archaeologists were able to find and extract from the earth about 1,750 wooden parts of the ship. As they were taken out, they were immediately transported to the museum, where a whole team of specialists worked on them, which reconstructed and preserved the parts of the ship. It turns out that the work of archaeologists and museum specialists was carried out in parallel. Museum specialists received about 1,300 items for work. They planned to study them in as much detail as possible and then try to reassemble the burial ship that has decayed over the millennia. For this purpose, about 100 Japanese experts are involved, and they use high-tech equipment in their work, scientists paying great hopes on their help. Scientists said that when they assemble the ship, it will be exhibited in the new museum building, which is currently still under construction for everyone to see. Mini Terracotta Army. Inside the 2,100-year-old pit, Chinese archaeologists have uncovered a miniature army, elaborate chariots, watchtowers, and tiny statues of cavalrymen, infantrymen, and musicians. The find looks like a miniature version of the Terracotta Army, a life-size collection of chariots and sculptures of soldiers, horses, artists, and civilian officials, which was created for Qin Shi Huang, the first emperor of China. Based on the design of the artifacts found, archaeologists believe they were made about 2,100 years ago, or about a century after the Terracotta Army. The southern part of the pit is filled with cavalry and chariot formations, as well as models of watchtowers 140 centimeters high. In the center of the pit, about 300 infantrymen stand in a square formation, and in the northern part of the pit, there is a model of a theater pavilion with small sculptures of musicians. Based on the date, size, and location of the pit, archaeologists believe that this army may have been built for Li Huang, Prince of Qi, part of China, who was the son of Emperor Wu Di, reigned 141–87 BC. Han lived in Linz, a Chinese city near an open pit, and died in 110 BC. The ancient texts say that Li Huang became Prince of Qi very young and unfortunately died early without leaving any successor. Shortly before Hang's death, according to the works of the ancient historian Bang Gu, a comet appeared in the sky over China. If the pit and its ceramic army were to protect Li Huang or some other noble person in the afterlife, then the grave must be somewhere nearby, although the tomb could have been destroyed. Some of the rulers of the Han Dynasty continued to build pits with armies of ceramic soldiers for their burials, but the soldiers were already much smaller. Stele of Naremzin. In Akkad, there was a king whose name was Naremzin, which in translation from the Akkadian language means favorite Sina. In local mythology, Sin was the god of the moon. Naremzin ruled around 2237–2200 BC. The activities of the king are known from literary monuments, which were written in the Sumerian, Hittite, and Akkadian languages. There are also preserved inscriptions of Naremzin himself, for example in the Temple of Lagash. There are sources that tell of the defeats of Naremzin. So, he sent people 3 times against the troops of Manda, who were located in the area of Lake Urmia. He was perplexed and depressed by several defeats, but as a result, he was still able to defeat the enemy. During the reign of Naremzin, the Akkadian kingdom was able to achieve the greatest power. The king ruled over all the occupied territories with the help of sons and officials whom he appointed to the post of Enzi. His daughters were priestesses, so they could also influence political life. The end of the reign of Naremzin is associated with the invasion of the mountain tribes of the Akkadians. This led to the fact that famine, epidemics, multiple deaths among the population began in the kingdom. The victorious stele of King Naremzin has a spiral structure of figures on a plane. In this, it differs significantly from the Sumerian technique of creating a composition. Military operations in the mountains were chosen for the plot. The stele itself resembles the top of a mountain, tapering towards the top. The creation consists of 3 compositional lines. They run almost parallel from bottom to top. This made it possible to show the path of the army of Naremzin, his ascent to the top of the mountain. The king's warriors ascend the parallel slopes. This practically does not happen in life. Usually people climb winded spiral roads. Also, the place of transition from slope to slope is not indicated. House of the Dragon. The House of the Dragon is located in the south of the island of Euboea, located off the eastern coast of mainland Greece. There are 25 of them in total. The houses themselves are rectangular structures made of huge megalithic limestone blocks, one above the other without any mortar. The gaps between the blocks are filled with other smaller stones, and the roof is covered with similarly large stone slabs with a small gap for lighting. They're called Houses of Dragons because local legend attributes to their creators unknown superhuman abilities. Because it takes into account the size of the stone blocks used in the construction process, it is believed that ordinary people could not build them. The mysterious dragon houses on Mount Ochi are located at an altitude of 1,386 meters and have an average size of 12.7 by 7.7 meters with a door in the center of a southern wall, which is 2 meters high and 1 meter wide, protruding over her. There are even small windows on the sides of the door. The walls have an average thickness of 1.4 meters, suitable for supporting a heavy stone roof, and the interior rises to an average height of about 2.4 meters. The building area is 48 square meters and the entire floor is covered with stone slabs. According to experts, the 3 dragon houses in Palilaka are very similar in size to the houses of Mount Ochi, but their walls are thinner, on average only 1.1 meter. The stone blocks used are also smaller, and the style of construction is rougher, less complex, and possibly more ancient. The houses were first described in the late 18th century by the British geologist John Hawkins, who climbed Mount Auchi on October 21, 1797. However, there is still no exact dating of these buildings. Some scholars believe that they can be dated back to the 7th century BC, as they are forerunners of the late Greek temples. Others consider them defensive structures of the Hellenistic period, 3rd, 4th century BC. However, experts cannot come to a consensus regarding their dating, and the lack of quarries from where the blocks were mined makes it difficult for them to work. The only strange thing is that despite their supermassive size and complex structural elements, there is absolutely no mention of these buildings in ancient sources. Therefore, all available information is obtained from the legends and folklore of the area where they were built, as well as information from researchers who visited these structures at a later time. In general, everything is as usual. No one knows anything, but scientists do not believe local legends because they tell about builders with superhuman abilities. But it seems to me that they were built by an older, highly developed civilization and left such traces of its existence in Greece. And it is quite possible that these are just houses and not observatories at all. Ancient settlement destroyed by the tsunami. Scientists have discovered traces of a powerful earthquake and tsunami that destroyed the settlements on the Chilean coast 3,800 years ago. People who lived on the coast of the Chilean Atacama Desert 5,700–4,000 years ago built villages from small stone houses on shell foundations. These houses stood not far from each other with access to the courtyards, and the dead were buried under their floors. The floor and walls were held together with a mortar of seaweed ash, seawater, and shells. Diego Salazar of the University of Chile and his colleagues explored these settlements and found large-scale destruction in them. For example, at one of the destroyed houses, the stones were carried away from the sea, as if knocked out by a giant wave. In another, the building material, on the contrary, is scattered towards the sea. Most likely, it was dragged by the water flowing into the sea. In another settlement, archaeologists found layers of sand and earth interspersed with many shells. Radiocarbon analysis showed that there are old shells in the layer of relatively new shells, as if a wave pulled them out of the ground and mixed them up. After analyzing the destruction, scientists came to the conclusion that 3,800 years ago there was a powerful tsunami, a wave from which destroyed settlements and caused upheavals in society. The reconstruction showed that the earthquake was caused by a giant thrust and subduction contact between the South American tectonic plate and the Nazca plate. The seismic moment of the earthquake should have reached 9.5 points, which somewhat exceeds the most powerful Chilean earthquake of 2010. Rare bone cross. The director of the Rostov Kremlin State Museum Reserve, Alexander Filayev, announced an interesting find by archaeologists. A rare bone cross was found measuring 6 by 3.5 by 0.9 centimeters. The front side depicts the Theotokos and John the Evangelist, and the reverse side depicts the saint in full growth. The inscription on the cross is illegible and probably reads Nickel. It is believed that this is an image of Saint Nicholas. Research in the metropolitan mansions goes in parallel with large-scale restoration work at the site. Excavations are carried out by the archaeological sector of the museum. According to preliminary data, the found cross belonged to the 16th century. It was found in layers that have formed before the 50s, 60s of the 17th century, before the construction of the building. Ochre, tools, and drugs trade. Scientists have discovered quarries built 2,100 years ago. They were part of the huge trading system of the indigenous people of Australia, Mitaka. It was called the Australian Silk Road. Australian indigenous people lived in the heart of a huge trade route, which is compared in volume to the Silk Road. Archaeologists have found sandstone mining sites in Australia on an industrial scale. They are, as far as researchers know, the largest in the southern hemisphere. This means that the trading systems of the first people of Australia were at the world level. These territories were called the country of the channels because of the interweaving of streams that were filled with water from the monsoon rains. Archaeologists were able to find out that the quarries of the Mitaka people who lived here were part of a well-developed trading system. Grinding stones, silicate tools, seeds, and much more were produced there. Grinding stones mined and processed on the land of the Mitaka people were exchanged for ochre, wooden objects, stone axes, and pituri, that is a drug. Mitaka land was once the center of a vast transcontinental trade route that trade from the Gulf of Carpentaria in the north to the Flinders Ranges in South Australia. Mitaka Indigenous Corporation Director Tracy Howe said that facilities were proof they had a truly developed economy. Ancient Roman city and the longest white road. The use of radar technology during archaeological research has been practiced for more than once a year, but it was in 2020 that it most successfully proved its worth. Not far from Rome, researchers using georadar found the ancient Roman city of Falerii Novi. And this despite the fact that until that moment it was already considered well studied. In fact, Falerii Novi began to be explored as early as the 19th century, but until recently there were no resources for large-scale excavations. It was a geodetic radar survey that made it possible to discover the architectural complexes of the city previously unknown to archaeologists: frames, an amphitheater, a bath complex, and others. Another discovery made last year using radar is the longest white road. It is located in Central America on the Yucatan Peninsula. Archaeologists suggest that the age of the road is about 1,000 years, and its construction was the initiative of the queen of the Mayan tribe Kavil Ahab. Stone Age settlements in Tibet. A number of Stone Age settlements have been discovered by scientists in recent years in Tibet. Their research served as an important breakthrough for the archaeological periodization of the history of mankind in the territory of the Tibet Autonomous Region. During 2020-2021, a group of archaeologists explored the settlement of Mapotso in the Kanmar district of Shigatse city. During the excavations, 10 burials, ash pits were found, the age of which is about 4,000 years. The finds include items made of stone, ceramics, and bones, as well as jewelry made of shells, jade, etc. Mapotso is the most ancient settlement among the known settlements in the deep regions of the Tibetan Plateau. Judging by the finds, ancient people were engaged in fishing and hunting here. The discovery will provide new opportunities in the search for answers to questions related to the culture of the late Paleolithic in Tibet and human adaptation to the highlands. In 2021, archaeologists also unearthed 14 ancient tombs in Bambar County, Chemdo City, and unearthed 40 artifacts including pottery, bronze, turquoise, and bowl-shaped ornaments. Chen Zuyun, a senior researcher at the Tibetan Institute for the Preservation of Cultural Monuments, said that the chronology of the finds, based on the radiocarbon dating data, refers to two periods, about 1,800 and 1,100 years ago. In 2021, the cultural departments of Tibet launched 21 archaeological projects and conducted research on 277 cave temples, as well as completed work on the preliminary examination of the possible impact of 12 major infrastructure projects on the protection of cultural heritage sites. The remains of a guy with a wolf's mouth. Archaeologists have discovered in Slovakia the remains of two individuals who were buried in the 17th or 18th century in a storage pit and in a hastily dug grave. One of them belonged to a young man who had orofacial clefts, a cleft palate, and a cleft lip. According to scientists, their death could have been violent since people with similar vices in some societies were considered vampires. Today, one of the most common craniofacial malformations in orofacial clefts, which occur approximately 1.4 times per thousand newborns. Doctors distinguish three main forms of this congenital defect: cleft lip, and palate, or only the palate. In colloquial speech, the concepts of cleft lip and cleft palate are used to describe such pathologies. Both genetic and environmental factors are involved in the pathogenesis of this disease. Although orofacial clefts are common today, human remains with such malformations are rare in the archaeological context. The most famous exception is the pharaoh Tutankhamun, whose tomb was discovered in the Valley of the Kings in 1922. In addition to the cleft palate, paleopathologists diagnosed him with clubfoot, Kuhle's disease, and several other diseases and injuries. In total, archaeologists know about 50 such examples, and in 80% of the cases, orofacial clefts were found in adults. So, the remains of one of the individuals were found in Altai during excavations of the burial of the Andronova culture in the burial ground of Fursuwa XIV. He was a young male aged 1823 who died around 1883-1665 BC. Scientists noted that the remains of a young man with a cleft lip and cleft palate were found on the territory of Slovakia for the first time in an archaeological context. Archaeologists reported that in modern population, this pathology is much more common. Perhaps this is due to the fact that in the past there was a high mortality of children with orofacial clefts. They were infanticides. In addition, maternal diet may have reduced the incidence of this malformation. The researchers concluded that both of these people could be foreigners. It seems that the body of a young man was lowered into the pit with his feet down, and perhaps he was previously tied up. An adult man was lowered with his head or back down. The bricks present in the backfill, according to archaeologists, could be due to the fact that the buried were considered dangerous dead. Although the scientists did not find any traumatic injuries, they did not rule out a violent death, but perhaps they could be from illness, hypothermia, or from some other reason. Tower of Skulls in Mexico. In fairness, it should be clarified that the very phenomena of the Tower of Skulls is not something new and unique. However, it was 2020 that gave archaeologists the opportunity to discover another such object. We found a new tower not far from the previously explored one on the territory of the Templo Mayor temple complex, which is located near Mexico City. The diameter of the Tower of Skulls is almost 5 meters, and the remains of more than 100 people have already been found in it. Archaeologists defined the date of creation of this object as the end of the 15th century. The Mexican government has already reacted to the discovery. The Minister of Culture of Mexico, Alejandro Frausto, called the found object the most impressive archaeological find in the country in recent years. The earliest fragments of the Mayan calendar. 2 fragments of an ancient wall may contain the earliest evidence of a pre-literate Mayan calendar. These images include, in particular, the head of a deer decorated with a dot and a line on top, which is one of the dates of the 260-day calendar cycle. These fragments were found in a temple built 2,300–2,200 years ago on the territory of modern Guatemala in Central America. A number of ancient civilizations in the pre-Columbian Americas, including the Aztecs, Maya, Mixtecs, and Zapotecs, tracked time using 13-day cycles marked with numbers, along with 20-day cycles associated with the gods. In such a calendar, each day was assigned both a number and a reference to a deity, which gave 260 unique combinations before the whole cycle was repeated. It is believed that the Indians used their calendar to determine the moments of the most important ceremonies and also mark historical dates in it and tried to predict future events with its help. Until now, the earliest evidence of the use of the calendar by ancient people came across on stone monuments dating from about 100 BC. Now, David Stewart of the University of Texas at Austin and his colleagues have found evidence that the Maya may have used this calendar a century earlier. Previously, back in 2001, this group excavated in the area of the archaeological complex of San Bartolo, which includes the Las Pinturas Pyramid, which means paintings. During the excavations, it turned out that the Mayans who inhabited the city repeatedly rebuilt the buildings, demolishing the old buildings and using them, in particular, in order to lay the foundation of the pyramid. Analyzing pieces of gypsum taken from the base of the pyramid, scientists discovered 2 fragments that fit perfectly together, which formed the symbol of the corresponding date. The oldest mold in Britain. The remains of a Roman mold house and chart spelt were found during excavations in Bedfordshire before the start of roadworks on the A428. Experts analyzed the find and suggested that the people who lived in the area were making beer. The site, known as Field 44, was excavated from July 2021 to February 2022. During excavations, teams from the London Archaeological Museum and the Cambridge Archaeological Unit unearthed the remains of buildings from the Iron Age or late Roman period. The Iron Age in Britain lasted from about 800 BC, before the arrival of the Romans. Scientists were able to establish that the char-spelt grains found were left to germinate before drying in an oven. This was probably done for the production of malt. Special brewing equipment could not be found at the excavation site, so it is not known where the ancient people completed the brewing of beer. Rachel Ballantyne, the project's scientific advisor, believes that there were malt houses on the territory of Field 44, and the raw materials were transported to another area. It also means that different communities in Britain were in close contact with each other. In 2019, evidence of ancient brewing was found during road repairs on the A14 in Cambridgeshire. Then the remains of ancient beer, bread, and porridge were found. Scientists have established that beer was made from barley, oats, and wholemeal flour, adding herbs. Why did they try to dismantle the pyramids of Giza? The Egyptian pyramids have been considered a wonder of the world for more than a century, striking the imagination of each new generation. But not everyone knows that because of the greed of the rulers of Egypt, we have more than once risked losing them forever. 12th century, by our standards, deep antiquity. But then the pyramids of Giza were as ancient as they are today. However, the young Sultan of Egypt, Al-Aziz Osman, did not appreciate antiquities too much and therefore decided to demolish them. Historians do not know exactly what motivated him. Some say that he believed that treasures were buried under the pyramid of Menkaure, not only inside its chambers but also under the foundation of the structure. Others say he wanted to destroy the pyramid so he could use the stone to build a new city wall. This seems like a plausible explanation, as other Egyptian leaders demolished smaller pyramids to get stone for construction. Al-Aziz did not seem to care much about the historical significance of the pyramids. Moreover, he did not even know about it. He knew that they were old, but people at that time did not know who built the pyramids and why. In some historical periods, people did not know at all that these were the tombs of kings, believing that they might have been ancient granaries. The Sultan ordered his men to proceed with the demolition of the Menkaure pyramid. However, things didn't work out. Historians have repeatedly described how incredibly difficult it was to build such large buildings without modern equipment. As it turned out, destroying such structures without modern technology is not easier. The workers managed to loosen several huge blocks, which fell into the desert sand and probably flattened several assembled onlookers. But it was such a slow process that Al-Aziz eventually withdrew the workers. The opening which they managed to dismantle exists to this day. This was not the last time someone tried to take apart the pyramids. Modern Egypt began in the 19th century under the rule of Muhammad Ali Pasha, who wanted to take apart the pyramids and use the rubble to build a dam and block the Nile. He reasoned that he would get rid of the old and give it a new life, putting it in the service of modern technology. As the story goes, the rescue of the pyramids fell to the chief French engineer, Lenin Pasha. Lenin volunteered to head a commission studying the costs of the project, and through some ingenious calculations, he convinced the Sultan that he could have a lot of money simply by extracting the stone needed for construction from a quarry. Lenin himself told the story many times, however, constantly changing some important facts, for example, confusing the name of the Sultan at whose court he served. It is possible that Lenin's participation was his fantasy, and the Egyptian engineers themselves came to the conclusion that it is easier to extract stone in an ordinary quarry. After all, crushed stone is cheap, and dismantling the pyramid is the opposite. Why did people break shale rings? Archaeologists from the University of Helsinki have examined more than 200 previously discovered slate rings and their fragments dating back to the 4th millennium BC. It turned out that in the Stone Age, these items were not just decorations or ritual goods. They were specially cut into fragments and divided among several people to indicate kinship or other social ties. Shale or tuff rings were common over 6,000 years ago among hunter-gatherers in northeastern Europe. 246 such objects have been found on the territory of today's Finland. Archaeologists often find various artifacts in a fragmented state, but in this case, they doubted that the rings had already collapsed in the ground or from antiquity on their own. Experts found and studied traces of tools and processing at the ends of the fragments of the rings and confirmed that these fragments were cut intentionally. Then a hole was made in them, probably for wearing on a cord or sewn to clothes. Scientists have suggested that this jewelry was never intended to be used as whole rings. Instead, they denoted parts of one whole. People who belonged to the same group, clan, or some other community received the pieces. Also, some rings have been found in Stone Age burials. According to archaeologists, there was an example when two fragments of the same ring were found in neighboring graves, which could indicate the relationship of the buried. One part was never found. Apparently, at the time of the funeral, one more person remained alive. With the help of X-ray fluorescence analysis, it was possible to establish that the jewelry comes from present-day Russia, from the shores of Lake Onega. From there, they were delivered hundreds of kilometers through an extensive network of exchanges. Products differ in chemical composition and design. The remains of the largest megaraptor in history. A team of paleontologists led by Moro Arenciaga Rolando have recovered the skeleton of one of the largest carnivorous dinosaurs known to science. It was discovered back in 2019, but due to the coronavirus pandemic, excavations had to be postponed. The extinct monster was named Macrothorax in honor of the evil spirit from the mythology of the Patagonian people Tulche. The remains found indicate that the dinosaur had a length of up to 10 meters and a weight of about 5 tons, which made it an incredibly dangerous predator. For comparison, other megaraptors were up to 8 meters long and were only a meter taller than a person, but at the same time, they were incredibly efficient when hunting. Outwardly, megaraptors looked like tyrannosaurs, with which they were confused in the past, but new research points to two fundamental differences. First, the bones of megaraptors were partially hollow, which made them excellent runners. Secondly, the small forelimbs were actually very developed, and with the help of claws up to 35 centimeters long, the raptors could inflict terrible wounds on their prey. There is a version that megaraptors could even grab their victims and tear them apart without using their mouth, because their teeth are rather small. Probably these predators relied on the speed and strength of their claws, and their size allowed them to hunt almost any fowl that lived on the territory of modern Argentina 70 million years ago. How people found or didn't find food. A new analysis of ancient predators' remains by Rice University provides new insights into how prehistoric humans found or didn't find their food. The behavior of the saber-tooth when consuming carcasses and the dynamics of large Pleistocene guilds of carnivores' work was published in scientific reports. For more than 3 decades, archaeologists have believed that one of the potential sources of meat, which was crucial for early human brain development, was the flesh left behind by saber-toothed cats. Until recently, researchers believed that prehistoric humans stripped the flesh from abandoned animal carcasses for food, but these ancient remains suggest that that was not the case. A new fossil study from 1.5 million years ago shows that saber-toothed cats completely consumed the flesh of their prey and even ate some of the bones. These legendary predators, so named because of their huge upper fangs, roamed the landscapes of Africa, Eurasia, and America from the Miocene to the late Pleistocene. Manuel Dominguez Rodrigo, visiting professor of anthropology at Rice and the first author of the study, along with his colleagues, was able to determine the feeding habits of these prehistoric cats based on their skeletons and those of their prey. Dominguez Rodrigo says the discovery is significant because it means that early humans used different ways to find protein sources. This provides further support for the idea that early humans were already successful hunters. Biggest ichthyosaur tooth. This tooth is huge by ichthyosaur standards. Its root was 60 millimeters in diameter. The largest specimen still in a complete skull today was 20 millimeters and belonged to an ichthyosaur that was almost 18 meters long. However, estimating the size of an ichthyosaur from its teeth alone is not an easy task because the most toothy species are often not the largest. The fact is that marine predators with large teeth often spend a lot of energy hunting, while giant filterine predators can afford to swim slowly, collecting the smallest prey. Other record finds in the Alps include the largest trunk vertebrae in Europe, rivaling even the 21 meters Schastosaurus cercaniensis, the largest ichthyosaur fossil ever found. However, the researchers know that they need new finds of ichthyosaurs fossils to complete the picture. 18,000 years underwater. At the time of another underwater exploration, divers made a sensational discovery. Quite by chance, they found a previously unknown passage which is located between the Dosius Caves and the Sa-Akti cave system. Sailing into this tunnel, they found many different artifacts. The divers immediately reported their find to the local authorities, and those in turn passed the information to archaeologists. A group of divers was engaged in the study of underwater caves. The total length of the passages is 372 kilometers. They are located near the Mexican resort of Tulum and are a huge cave system. Most of it is filled with water. This gives it the right to be the second longest of the Mammoth Cave in the United States. The water in the cave contains a large amount of minerals, because of which living creatures cannot live in it. The news delighted archaeologists, and they immediately assumed that they would find many valuable artifacts from different eras and centuries in these places. Their intuition did not fail them. Scientists began research as soon as possible and immediately discovered more than 200 sites that store various archaeological remains in the form of human bones, animal fossils, and even Mayan household items. According to preliminary data, the length of the newly discovered cave is 80 kilometers. Archaeologists, without hesitation, call this place a real treasury because objects that are about 18,000 years old are stored here. At the same time, do not forget that since the Ice Age, the level of the world's oceans has risen by more than 100 meters. Therefore, we can safely establish that for ancient people, these places served as a refuge and home. The divers managed to find Mayan altars and incense burners. Items from earlier eras were also found. Fossils of 20 animal species of the late Pleistocene. The finds included the remains of 14 prehistoric fires. To what period they belong is still unknown. An interesting find was the tools that have not been studied to date. According to scientists, the age of the found artifacts coincides with the end of the last ice age, 11,700 years ago. At the moment, this place is closed to the public, as it is extremely important to conduct research without prying eyes. At the same time, experts expressed the hope that this is not the last discovery of those places. Drawings can rewrite the history of a city. In Turkey, about 2 kilometers from the ancient city of Alinda, a group of archaeologists discovered a cave in the nutria of which turned out to be rock paintings capable of rewriting the history of the ancient city, whose age was considered to be early 3,500 years. Now the discovered drawings can completely change the history of the city. After their study, scientists dated them to the 5th millennium BC. Before that, scientists were sure that the city of Alinda arose about 3,500 years ago. But now, judging by the drawings, people appeared here much earlier as previously thought, that is, about 7,000 years ago. The cave was discovered during fieldwork in the area. Scientists did not think that they would find a real sensation inside it. In addition to rock paintings, handy materials were found inside the cave, which were most likely used in antiquity. On the walls were depicted human-like figures that scientists have yet to identify. But scientists have already established that images of both men and women were painted on the walls of the cave. But what exactly they depict remains unclear. Scientists still have a lot of work to do before they can unravel the mystery of the drawings. The ancient city of Alinda was once considered one of the largest trading centers in Anatolia. In the center of the city, there was a huge market square where, in addition to selling goods, meetings were also held. Olive oil and figs were produced in large quantities in the city. All these goods were traded throughout the Hellenistic world, and now it turns out that the city arose much earlier than scientists thought, which means that scientists are waiting for new excavations and studies of both the city itself and its environs. 1,100-year-old skull altar. In 2012, Mexican authorities first discovered a cave that contained about 150 human skulls. The police then thought it was a modern crime scene and planned to open an investigation. Now a new study has revealed that the skulls found were likely the result of ritual human sacrifices performed 1,100 years ago. How can you confuse an archaeological find with a crime scene? The fact is that the skulls of pre-Hispanic indigenous cultures were often found badly damaged. Usually they were split and placed in ceremonial circles. However, these skulls remained completely intact. Police also believed that the cave of Frontera Comalapa was the perfect place for local gangs to hide bodies. Researchers have found that the skulls from the cave are much older than police thought. They date from between 900 and 1200 AD. The teeth of the skulls were removed, which was in accordance with the customs of that time. Scholars believe that the site was once home to a tsapantle, or altar of skulls. These are structures that were used by Mesoamerican civilizations to place the skulls of captives or perform sacrifices. Most often, tsapantle were made of wood, so over time, almost no traces of them remained. Archaeologists continue to work in the area in the hope of finding similar altars or any other artifacts from those times. Mystery of the medieval wanderer. Scientists from the University of Aberdeen, after a recent study, have established how the famous medieval wanderer ended up in Edinburgh. We are talking about a man whose remains dating back to the 6th century AD, along with 13 other people, were discovered in 1975 under a parking lot. Then it was believed that this was a local family that had become a victim of the plague. Now the analysis, which was carried out by experts, showed that the medieval wanderer was not associated with the rest of the group and arrived in the capital of Scotland from the Southern Highlands or Loch Lomond. Ursula Sherry, the head of the research, noted that this discovery was the key to obtaining information about the movements of people in early medieval Scotland and beyond. We know little about the life of the people at that time, but we know for sure that it was a politically and socially turbulent period. Traveling and getting around was not easy back then. Sherry and her team also determined that several members of the group, including the medieval wanderer, had died in agony. They made such a conclusion after studying the skulls. Most likely they were hit with some kind of blunt object which led to a fatal outcome. This evidence provides important confirmation that the period under review was characterized by high levels of violence. The specialists plan to continue their work to get even more information and learn more about the history of Scotland in the Middle Ages. Found an ancient underground shelter. Scientists have found an ancient underground city where the first Christians hid, and it is, not surprisingly, in Turkey. A couple of years ago, under the Turkish city of Midyat, research began on a large-scale cave complex. Local residents knew about the existence of the caves themselves, but had no idea about the scale of the underground structures. First, archaeologists found a corridor in one of the caves, which led to the dungeon. In the underground city, altars, warehouses used for provisions, wells, as well as a network of tunnels were found. Presumably, the first Christians hid here almost 2,000 years ago from the persecution of the Roman Empire. At that time, this region was part of the Roman state, and the city of Midyat was located in the province of Assyria. Scholars believe that Christians who were initially fleeing persecution used the underground city after the collapse of the Roman Empire to hide from numerous wars that eventually led to the Islamization of the region. According to archaeologists, the underground city ceased to exist after the genocide of Armenians, who are also Christians, occurred in 1915. Ancient remains from the time of the death of dinosaurs. Paleontologists have discovered the first ever fossilized remains of a dinosaur that died on the day a massive asteroid hit Earth 66 million years ago. Scientists have discovered the leg of a Thescelosaurus, a small herbivorous dinosaur, next to a fragment of a giant meteorite that killed it. Experts believe that the scanned limb was most likely torn off in the fall of the giant Chicxulub asteroid and then buried in the fallen debris on the day of the fall. A Thescelosaurus fossilized leg was discovered along with a series of unique artifacts at the Tanis fossil site in the US state of North Dakota, known as the Hell Creek Formation. This site, which was first discovered in 2008, is unusual in that it actually recorded events from the first minutes to hours after the Chicxulub impact in great detail. Paleontologists say this is the first discovery of a dinosaur that was the victim of the famous asteroid impact, which created an impact crater about 150 kilometers wide in what is now the Gulf of Mexico. They also believe that they have discovered a tiny fragment of the space rock that ended the age of dinosaurs and led to the emergence of mammals. Among the finds in Tanis are unique specimens, a fish with small fragments from a meteorite impact in its respiratory tract, a petrified turtle pierced with a wooden stake, and the skin of a horned triceratops. Professor Paul Barrett of the Natural History Museum in London said the preserved lag once belonged to a dinosaur from the genus Chelalosaurus, whose name translates to wonderful lizard. Before, we didn't have reliable knowledge of what their skin looked like. This find shows very convincingly that these animals were scaly like lizards. They were not covered in feathers like their meat-eating contemporaries. The study shows that something very quickly turned off the lag of the animal. There are no signs of disease on the lag, no obvious pathologies, no signs of eating the lag such as bite marks or missing pieces. So the best idea we have is that this animal died more or less instantly. Tanis was discovered in 2008, but it was until 2019 that it was announced to the general public. The distance between Tanis and the site of the Chicxulub impact crater in the present-day Gulf of Mexico of the Yucatan Peninsula is more than 2,500 kilometers, but the force of impact in a collision with a meteorite was such that it was reflected throughout the planet. This video has come to an end, but there are many other videos on the channel about the finds of archaeologists. The deadliest place on the planet. American scientists from the University of Colorado and Brigham Young University in Utah have made an incredible discovery. They have discovered what is arguably the deadliest place on planet Earth. According to experts, an unexplained phenomenon was found in the ice of Antarctica. This is a site in the center of the Trans-Antarctic Mountains. During the expedition, scientists initially wanted to analyze the composition of the soil on the Shackleton Glacier, which is located almost 500 kilometers from the South Pole. Surprisingly, of the 204 soil samples, approximately 20% showed no signs of life. Dead soil samples were collected in the highest and driest places of the glacier. These samples not only did not contain any microbes, they did not even have traces of microbial DNA. Scientists initially thought it was due to some mistake, but repeated analyses have shown that there really is absolutely no sign of life in these soil samples. Burned forest. This discovery expands knowledge of the occurrence of forest fires in the Cretaceous, showing that such episodes were more frequent than previously thought. According to a study by an international group of scientists, 75 million years ago, Antarctica was engulfed in forest fires. Experts came to this conclusion after finding fossilized plants with traces of charcoal dating back to the time when dinosaurs still roamed the Earth. The once dense forests on James Ross Island were burned down during the Upper Cretaceous, the second section of the Cretaceous system dating from 100 to 66 million years ago. According to experts, the main reason for this event could be volcanic activity caused by tectonic processes. James Ross Island is a volcanic island located near the western end of the Antarctic Peninsula. The charcoal fragments are believed to be burned out gymnosperms, a group of plants that includes conifers, cycads, ginkgo, and oppressive trees. The Cretaceous forest fires were a global event that swept through almost every continent, but new research by scientists shows that these fires reached as far south as Antarctica. Millions of years ago, Antarctica was the real forest paradise. It had a lot of blooming vegetation, but the volcanoes turned this paradise into uninhabitable hell. It should be noted that the fossilized samples were analyzed under a stereo microscope, an optical microscope that works on the principle of light reflected from the object under study. With its help, scientists were able to look deep inside the fossilized plants and find evidence that the samples were charred. Lake under 4 kilometers of ice. One of the largest geographical discoveries of the 20th century is the subglacial Lake Vostok, which was discovered in Antarctica. The most amazing thing about this find is that it was hidden under a layer of ice 4 kilometers thick. Scientists believe that the lake was cut off from the outside world by a glacier for several million years. The dimensions of Vostok are striking. The total area of the lake is about 16,000 square kilometers, and the depth can reach 1,200 meters. Most likely, it remains unfrozen due to underground geothermal sources. Drilling the well was a difficult and lengthy process. It began in 1989, was suspended in 1999 due to fears of contaminating the unique ecosystem, and returned to it only in 2006 to be completed in 2013. Science. Since 2015, the active stage of studying the lake has begun. In a water sample, scientists discovered microorganisms, one of which is of an unknown species. But these were samples from the surface. The most interesting will begin when they can get samples from the bottom, where, according to assumptions, the water is heated by thermal springs and is suitable for life. Perhaps scientists will soon be able to find unprecedented types of creatures. Who knows how evolution developed in the closed ecosystem of the Vostok? Evidence of a large meteorite falling. Melted particles of extraterrestrial matter collected by scientists in East Antarctica indicate that about 430,000 years ago, a large meteorite or asteroid fell here, which did not leave a crater behind because it turned into a stream of molten material on its approach to Earth. Nevertheless, the strength of this impact event, according to the author's estimates, was higher than that from the fall of the Tunguska meteorite. An international group of geologists and planetary scientists led by Dr. Matthias van Ginneken of the University of Kent School of Physical Sciences in the UK has discovered evidence in the Serundane Mountains region that 430,000 years ago, a powerful impact event occurred here. The fall of an asteroid or a large meteorite sizes from 100 to 150 meters. Scientists have found tiny particles, condensation spherules ranging in size from 100 to 300 micrometers, which formed when the meteorite, just short of reaching the ground, exploded near the surface, releasing a jet of molten and vaporized material. Experts attribute such events to the transitional type, which occupies an intermediate position between the explosions of extraterrestrial bodies in the atmosphere and impact events, as a result of which meteorite craters are formed. Despite the fact that, according to scientists, large air explosions occur much more often than impacts of meteorites that form craters, and some of these events were powerful enough, it is very difficult to record them in the geological record, since all that remains of them is these are the smallest fused particles of extraterrestrial matter. To identify and study 17 black spherical particles found near the top of Velnamjel in the Serundane Mountains, the authors used modern methods of microscopy and laser analysis. It turned out that by their composition, the spherules collected by the researchers belong to chondrites, and the ratio of trace elements and a high content of nickel confirms their primary extraterrestrial nature. However, the unique isotopic signatures of oxygen indicate that the particles interacted with the Antarctic ice sheet as they fell. By means of numerical simulations, scientists have proved that this was a larger event in scale than the fall of the Tunguska meteorite in 1908 or the Chelyabinsk meteorite in 2013. Ancient civilization pyramids. These structures, according to the researchers, are man-made. They were built in those ancient times when instead of snow and ice, the jungle raged on the continent. The pyramidal structures discovered by scientists in Antarctica are called man-made. Researchers are confident that this continent was not always a frozen continent, and once it served as a habitat for an unknown ancient civilization. The facilities were built at a time when Antarctica was covered with rainforests. No one doubts that the pyramids found in the eternal ice are the work of the Homo sapiens. After all, the objects are built with the highest accuracy, so there can be no question of any natural origin. Outwardly, the Antarctic pyramids resemble their famous Egyptian counterparts. Creature unknown to science. New Zealand scientists have discovered something interesting in the waters of Antarctica. So during the expedition on the ship RV Tangaroa, scientists caught a previously unknown jelly-like creature off the coast of Antarctica. The researchers conducted a real raid off the coast of the mainland and carried out the capture of marine life. In particular, the mesh ladder was lowered 3,500 kilometers inland off the coast of Antarctica. What they caught surprised everyone. The main find was dirt. Only after passing 12 buckets of mud through a sieve, scientists discovered this creature, a transparent jelly-like fish. As the head of the expedition, Dr. Andrew Stewart said, "It is not known what kind of creature it is. Now scientists will determine the parameters of this inhabitant of Antarctica. First of all, the vertebrae, in order to determine what kind of species it is in general, and so the new fish resembles a sea cucumber." The polar explorers also installed a deep-sea camera to the latter to inspect the bottom. The members of the expedition said that at such a depth, the bottom looks deserted, like the surface of an uninhabited planet. Human elongated skulls. Scientists are wondering if they belong to aliens. A group of archaeologists from the Smithsonian Institution have discovered 3 elongated human skulls in the Lapale region, Antarctica. Prior to this, it was believed that the continent had never been visited by humans until the modern era. Experts said the previously elongated skulls were found in Peru and Egypt, which suggests that ancient civilizations were in contact with each other long before the time it was written in the history books. It shows that there was contact thousands of years ago between civilizations in Africa, South America, and Antarctica. The shape of the elongated skulls is believed to have resulted from deliberate deformation. The baby's head, when the skull was still unsteady, was tightly wrapped with cloth. This characteristic was used to confer distinction on the upper classes of society over the lower ones. Children of the elite in many ancient cultures were subjected to the procedure. However, some researchers question whether artificial skull deformation can change not only the shape of the skull, but also increase its volume. The sensational find has many other physical characteristics that significantly distinguish these skulls from normal human ones. As a result, scientists are now struggling with the question whether these skulls are human or belong to some other kind of humanoid. Huge deposits of dinosaur bones. During the Antarctic expedition, a team of scientists from Australia, the United States, and South Africa discovered more than a ton of fossils and dinosaur remains up to 71 million years old. Steve Salisbury, a scientist from the University of Queensland, told ABC News about the unique discovery. Together with colleagues from other scientific institutions of the world, he worked on the James Ross and Viga Islands in Antarctica. These islands are among the few places in the region where snow is minimal in summer. At the same time, rocks trace their history back to the time of the dinosaurs. The first dinosaur remains found in Antarctica were found on James Ross Island. The discovery was made by archaeologists from Argentina in 1986. Research carried out by specialists in 2006 was also crowned with success, but in both cases, it was about single samples of fossils. As part of the new expedition, which took place in February and March 2016, scientists slowly moved through the territory of the islands, carefully studying each stone. Every day they covered about 10 kilometers. The result was unprecedentedly rich catch. In total, more than a ton of dinosaur remains were found. Some of them are 71 million years old. The fossils were taken to Chile and then shipped to the Carnegie Museum of Natural History in Pennsylvania for further study. Scientists have warned that it will take years to classify all the species found. It is already known that among the finds are the remains of Plesiosaurus and Mesosaurus, sea lizards known from the Hollywood film about the Jurassic period, as well as various birds, including ducks, that lived at the end of the Cretaceous period. Ancient citadel. The structure is hidden under a huge layer of ice, but scientists have discerned the remains of ancient walls in it. Explorers of the Shackleton Ridge in Antarctica stumble upon an unexpected find. Strange objects resembling ancient buildings. They resemble the walls of a fortress in their outlines. It is generally known that Lazarev and Bellingshausen were the first to reach Antarctica in 1820, but these are representatives of our modern civilization. Could it be that Antarctica was mastered by those who lived on Earth before us? It is believed that the remains of an ancient pyramid, such as those built in Egypt and South America, were captured in the frame. Another version, more prosaic, is really the remains of a citadel, which was built by some ancient civilization. An unknown people could have explored Antarctica at a time when it was not yet completely covered with snow. Map of Antarctica 1513. This map, made by the Turkish admiral Piri Reis in 1513 on a piece of gazelle skin, is considered one of the first geographical maps that accurately depicts the coast of South and North America. But the most amazing thing is that the outlines of Antarctica appear on it, which in those days was never even heard of. This is understandable. The map was compiled just 21 years after the epoch-making journey of Columbus. By the way, Antarctica is not shown on the map entirely, but is connected with South America. This fact makes geographers doubt that by these lands the author meant the White Continent, and pseudoscientists to build fantastic theories. For example, that the map was drawn on the basis of mysterious ancient sources found in the days when a glacier lay between Antarctica and South America. However, in this case, the land should have been covered with snow as well, which does not follow from the map drawing. The mainland ice sheet itself was formed several million years ago, and Homo sapiens as a species appeared, according to various estimates, from 200,000 to 40,000 years ago. In general, while some are looking for traces of ancient civilizations on the map of Piri Reis, others consider the drawing to be a common mistake of a cartographer or the embodiment of fantasies about the existence of hypothetical southern lands, ideas about which arose long before Piri Reis. How else would such carts appear with sea monsters on them? Centenary whiskey and brandy. The waters of the seas and oceans hide many secrets and mysteries of which have accumulated enough over the long era of Homo sapiens. That is why they attract the attention of many treasure hunters and underwater archaeologists from all over the world. The most unexplored areas of the world's oceans are Arctic waters, where an expedition from the Antarctic Heritage Fund recently made an amazing find. An unusual find of the researchers turned out to be 5 boxes of strong alcohol, which had been frozen in the ice for more than 100 years, as suggested by the researchers who discovered them while studying the coastline. The whiskey was previously owned by British Arctic explorer Ernest Shackleton, who left it there on an expedition. Due to a shortage of food in 1909, the researcher and the team had to urgently leave the camp before the winter ice bound the sea. As the foundation said, several of the boxes have been damaged by time and are difficult to remove. 3 boxes contain old Mackinlay's whiskey, 2 others contain brandy bottles. After removing the boxes from under the ice, the researchers found that several bottles were broken, but alcohol was splashing in others. After the seizure of the boxes, the producers of alcohol, White and Mackay, became interested in its contents, who called the find a gift from heaven, since the recipe for making this whiskey has long been lost. According to company representatives, if they have this whiskey in their hands, they will be able to reproduce this ancient recipe, and whiskey connoisseurs will be able to taste the true taste of the history of the last century. Write in the comments which discovery in Antarctica surprised you the most. Leave a kind comment, which helps a lot in the development of the channel. Thanks for your views. Bye everyone!